Numbers seem to stabilise, so I will start. Hello and welcome to the Bar Council seminar, Disability, Inclusion, Quick Wins and Easy Steps. Before I introduce my fellow panelists, a little by way of housekeeping. Could I, there will be a Q&A at the end of presentations. Could I please ask that you do not use the chat function for questions, but use the Q&A function. The chat function won't be monitored, the Q&A function will be, and some questions may be capable of being answered by Bar Council staff who will be monitoring the Q&A function as we go. There is also a facility for subtitles or live transcription. On my screen, there's a little button at the bottom. I'm not quite sure where it'll be on your screen, but subtitles will be available. Finally, this session is being recorded and it will be available on the Bar Council website, likely in about a week, possibly a few days after that. Again, welcome. This seminar is being hosted by the Bar Council's Disability Panel, of which I'm chair. The Disability Panel seeks to provide advice, guidance, suggestions on good practice to the profession and individual barristers, and also represents the profession to external bodies such as Judicial Office, Bar Standards Board, and the Law Society. This evening, we are hoping, amongst other things, to identify for you all what the Disability Confidence Scheme is. And we're hoping to encourage chambers to sign up to that very worthwhile scheme. Similarly, to let you know all about the wonderful Access Able app, tell you what it is and encourage your chambers to sign up. Before we get to the Q&A, you will hear from the quite remarkable Konstantina Nuka. Konstantina is the chair and founder of Bringing Disability to the Bar and incoming bar student at City University. She's been diagnosed with Ullrich muscular dystrophy and aspires to pursue a career as a public human rights and criminal law barrister. She holds an LLB from the University of Reading and an LLM in human rights law from University College London. And she will be applying for pupillage in this application cycle. And you will hear from Konstantina about her story and how she's navigated coming to the bar. Thereafter, you will hear from the wonderful Fleur Donnelly-Jackson. Fleur is from the Business Disability Forum, and she will be telling us a little about becoming disability confident, the Disability Confidence Scheme. Fleur is the lead business disability partner at the Business Disability Forum, where she works as a strategic advisor on disability inclusion to both government departments and business. She also recently completed the barrister training course. And then finally, in terms of presentations, you will hear from the lovely Anna Nelson. Anna is the Chief Executive of Accessible. She will be speaking on the why and how of improving access information. In a previous role, Anna was project director for a range of landmark initiatives across Access Able's client portfolio, including members of the FTSE 250. Anna joined Access Able having grown up as a young carer, and frankly, hearing about quite how remarkable a product Access Able is, I think you will all be very impressed. Finally, we're joined by two other colleagues. Mark Henderson. Mark, as well as being a friend, is a member of Doughty Street Chambers, specialising in media and human rights law. He is a former Legal Aid Barrister of the Year. He sits on the Bar Council's Disability Panel with me, and he represented on the RCJ's Accessibility Project Board. He is also a member of the Bar Standards Board's new Disability Task Force. And outside the bar, he is vice chair of the Spinal Injuries Association. And finally, we are joined by David Livermore. David is a director at Accessible and is responsible for much of its consultancy work and would probably be the person chambers would deal with most regularly if they sought to sign up for the Access Able app. But as I say, Mark and David are here for the Q&A after we've heard the presentations. Having said that, I will hand over to Konstantina. I'm sure we're all very eager to hear about her story navigating the bar. Konstantina.
Hi everyone. As you've just heard, my name is Konstantina. I am the chair at Bringing Disability to the Bar. I have been diagnosed with a physical disability, which requires me to use a wheelchair. Yesterday was my first day of bar school at City, and I still cannot really believe that I'm in bar school. It feels very unreal. I'm sure you're wondering why it feels so unreal to me. Well, unfortunately, my first impressions of bar during law school were the impressions where a disabled immigrant woman is seen as an outsider and even a trespasser. Let me now explain why I got that impression and how this impression has fortunately changed in the past year. I will start by explaining the two main reasons why for many years I felt that I would be a trespasser if I was to pursue a career as a barrister. The first reason is this: physical inaccessibility. I remember being very frustrated every time I got the news at the set of chambers. I was so interested to apply for a mini pupillage was not wheelchair accessible, or actually going to chambers that said that they were accessible, to only then find out that in order to access their disabled toilets, there's a step, or that their ramp is broken so I cannot even access the building. But then it's not just chambers that are not accessible. Courts, as I'm sure you know, are well known for not being accessible too. I remember in my first year of undergrad as a very ambitious law student, I was very eager to visit my local Crown Court, and I had to park my wheelchair between the wooden benches of the councils and the public gallery. I felt very awkward when barristers tried to access the benches and I was sitting in the middle, unable to find an accessible seat. And I thought to myself, when I become a barrister, where am I supposed to sit and address the judge, witnesses, and the jury from? This was a thought that made me cry. But then there are also the barriers and attitudes that stem from a lack of understanding of disabilities. Many barristers advised me throughout my LLB that I should pursue an academic career because the bar is a very exhausting job for a disabled person. And then let's not forget comments to the effect, okay, if you go to the bar, then I would advise you not to pursue crime, because how are you going to get to court easily, travel, or with your clients? I know that there was no malice behind these words. However, I kept feeling like an outsider. Through bringing them into the bar, I realized that the bar is becoming more accessible. The bar as a profession wants to become more diverse and include disabled individuals within its realm. Barristers do understand the value of supporting disabled aspiring barristers accessing the profession, because they know A, that the bar must be representative of the wider society, and B, that disabled people bring skills that are key for the bar, such as resilience, empathy, being solution-oriented, and think out of the box. More needs to happen though. Firstly, more chambers need to become disability confident in order to improve current ways of recruiting many pupils, and tenants, for example. Secondly, more chambers need to publish their accessibility information on their website. This is a way for chambers so that accessibility is important for them, and they put effort behind it. I should not be required to constantly email someone to check whether that particular set will be accessible to me as a wheelchair user. And finally, more chambers need to make personal justice policies publicly known instead of disabled people having to constantly inquire about them. All the above applies to the age of court as well and what they do, and to programs such as People's Getaway. Remember, if we don't take further action, the bar will remain a profession where disabled people are disproportionately underrepresented. Thank you.
Fleur, I think it's you next.
Thank you. I am just going to share some slides, so let me get those up first. Can I just check they can be seen? Perfect. So I'm going to talk to you about the government's disability confidence scheme and share why we think this is something that you should consider in chambers. So the scheme, it's a government scheme. You can find out the information on their website. We can share that link with you as well. It's got 3 levels. I'm going to talk you through those 3 levels. It replaces the 2-tick scheme which used to exist. And importantly, it's something that it's not legally binding, but we strongly encourage exploring it and the support that you can find in order to take you through these different levels. So level 1 is committed, level 2 is employer, and level 3 is leader. And what does that mean? So at level 1, disability confident employers must agree to a range of different commitments. So these include ensuring your recruitment process is inclusive and accessible, that you communicate and promote your vacancies, that you use the offer an interview scheme to disabled people who meet your essential criteria, that you anticipate and provide reasonable adjustments as required, and that you support any existing employee who acquires a disability or long-term health condition, enabling them to stay in work. So it's very much about what you can do to fairly recruit and retain disabled talent within your organisation. So some of the sorts of activities that you might be asked about and expected to be able to deliver at least one of these in order to comply with level 1 are opportunities such as work experience. So you might describe that as mini pupillage in chambers, work trials, paid employment, apprenticeships, job shadowing, traineeships, internships, student placements, and sector-based work academy placements. Now, obviously, the scheme goes across different sectors, not only barristers' chambers. So some of these may not apply to you, but at the very least, you should be offering at least one of these activities to disabled candidates. And how do you sign up? So this is the web address for the Disability Confidence site. So https://disabilityconfident.dwp.gov.uk. And you complete an online form. And once you've completed that, your pledge, you've gone through the process, you receive a certificate, logo, and official accreditation as a Disability Confident Level 1 committed organisation, and that accreditation will last for 3 years. So you can see it's not a high bar, so I really encourage you, if you're at the start of this journey, to really think about signing up for level 1. So level 2. So for level 2, which is employer, organisations must carry out a self-assessment against a set of criteria and activities on recruiting and retaining disabled people. This is designed to get you to look at your policies and processes, what projects you have in place, your systems relating to disability inclusion. And it helps you to see what you're doing, any plans you have in the pipeline, and what you may need to do to go further in your disability inclusion journey. And you should be looking at the evidence that you have to back up your statements and establish what gaps there might be in your practices and put plans in place to address any gaps. So once you've undertaken the self-assessment, you complete an online form on the same Disability Confident website, and you receive a certificate and a logo and official accreditation as a level 2 Disability Confident employer. And you should be looking to use that logo in that status as a disability confident employer, perhaps on your website, in your recruitment packs, in the information that you're sharing to disabled candidates, in fact all candidates, so that they've got that sense of you are a disability confident employer and you've taken account of these different disability inclusive processes when it comes to recruitment and retaining disabled talent. You'll also, once you get to level 2, receive the level 3 pack to encourage you to start the next part of your disability confident journey. And again, accreditation lasts for 3 years. So then level 3, so leader, so this is the top tier to be disability confident. To become a level 3 leader, employers must have their self-assessment and accompanying evidence validated by an external organisation. And Business Disability Forum, we're an accredited validator of level 3 submissions. This is free to our members as a service. So what you need to do is, it's similar to the self-assessment. You fill in a template form, going through similar evidence in terms of the different activities and how you are supporting disabled candidates and employees. You need to provide, however, backup evidence to that to show how you're satisfying that criteria and those chosen activities. And after your external validation is complete, you fill out a form again on the same Disability Confident website, and the Disability Confident team at DWP, they'll confirm your level 3 accreditation and your logo and your certificate. Crucially, I think when we carry out validation at BDF, we don't just rubber stamp you and say, yes, you've met level 3. We'll really look carefully at the evidence you provide, and we may also make recommendations about things that you may wish to consider to actually improve in terms of your disability confidence as an organisation, things that you might not have explored or activities you might not have thought about that might just take you further in terms of being truly inclusive to disabled talent. And again, the accreditation will last for 3 years. If you don't renew your accreditation after 3 years, what happens is you drop down to the next level. So it is an ongoing process. It's not something that you do once. You need to make sure that you keep up with your practice around being a disability confident organisation. So the Business Disability Level 3 validation process, if it's of interest, you're very welcome to reach out to us. And I know that Sam will be very happy to hear that chambers wish to sign up to Disability Confident, and you can get in touch with her to be put in contact with us at BDF so that we can perhaps support you. The process is you send your submission and evidence using that validation template. We will go through it, we'll assign somebody to go through your evidence, and then we'll confirm the turnaround for that tends to be about 4 to 6 weeks to look at all of that evidence. We'll come back to you and highlight any gaps, any legal reputational risk. We'll highlight your good practice as well, really important, and we may make recommendations for future improvement. And what we will do is make sure that we offer you a debrief so that you can talk through those gaps and good practice and what those recommendations might be. And as I said, it's free of charge for members and partners. So how do we support you? So we help organisations who are our members to go on that journey from level 1 to level 2 and level 3. And we help you to get through that level 3 by supporting you to explore what it is, what are the kinds of evidence that are expected, how do you look at those questions and make sure you're doing a really good job of putting in your submission for Disability Confident level 3. And then we will take you through that journey so that once you've done the validation, you get the debrief at the end, so that it's a kind of whole life cycle in terms of going through the process of Disability Confident. We provide ongoing guidance to help you to meet the criteria and activities. We also, as an organisation, have a wider offer to members as well. So we carry out things like recruitment policy reviews. It might be of your recruitment policies, your workplace adjustments processes, policies relating to sickness, absence, performance, capability management, or just more general equality and diversity approaches. We can conduct document reviews, might be of your job descriptions and adverts. So it could be that you are offering activities, but you may want some further support around how can we make sure our job descriptions and our adverts and our careers web pages are truly inclusive. We can support you with ongoing projects. So it might be around some expertise around the offer and interview scheme, which at times can confuse some because you do need to meet that minimum criteria. You might know the offer and interview scheme in its previous guise, which is the guaranteed interview scheme. And we can support you with projects like data monitoring, how to engage your disabled employees, and around training and e-learning, and review any guidance given to recruiters and line managers on disability adjustments. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of the support that Business Disability Forum can offer you. And I just would really encourage you to think about, as chambers, signing up to Disability Confident. If you are right at the start of your journey, level 1 is a really good place to start. But obviously, it's not just a one-time only process. You've got the opportunity to move way through those 3 different levels of Disability Confident. And it's something that you can make sure that you're putting it out there in terms of your communications and on your website, and when you're recruiting disabled talent to your organisation, so they're really sure that they are coming to an organisation that does understand disability inclusion. So I am now going to just pop out of the screen share. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fleur. And I think we now hand over to Anna.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm also going to try and share some slides, so following Fleur's seamless start. Hopefully everyone can see those okay. If my fellow panelists could give me a nod if they're there. Perfect, thank you very much. So good evening everybody, I'm Anna Nelson, I'm the Chief Executive of Accessable, and really I'm here to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what Accessable is all about, and I thought I'd showcase in brief some of the work we've done for 7BR, because I think it's a good example of what we do, and it maybe brings it alive a little bit to everyone who's joined us today. So as Accessable as an organisation, we've actually been going a really long time. We were set up back in 2000 by our founder Gregory Burke, who some of you may know. He's an employment law barrister at 7BR. Gregory, like many disabled people, wasn't born with his impairment. He became unwell when he was 16, and having spent 4 years in a mixture of hospital and rehab, went back home as a new wheelchair user, and as Constantina alluded to, faced a number of barriers, whether it be the physical environment or people's attitudes. But a key thing for him was actually how information could either empower him or disempower him. And he found there was a real lack of information around the accessibility of places, and trying to just find out really factual based information, like, you know, can I park, can I get in the door, can I go to the loo? And he had the idea of creating a website on which anyone with any form of access requirement could look and check out the reality of the places they wanted or needed to go. A really key part of this for us was actually going out and talking to disabled people about this service and what it should look like and how it should all work. And that fed into the launch of our first version of our website back in March 2002, and I joined in 2004. And that the service we provide, and the website particularly, has gone through many iterations to really reflect the needs of disabled people who use that service. So to give you an idea of our scale, we're an SME, we employ around 85 people, but over the last 22 years, we've been really privileged to work with many different and diverse organisations. So we currently work with just under 400 organisations, which includes a large number of NHS trusts and universities, local authorities, as well as some of the big FTSE 250 companies like Tesco and Next and Marks and Spencer. Our website, which is the portal of all of our information, which anyone can use for free, was used by 4.6 million people over the last year. They looked at lots of different guides to the different places and spaces that we've surveyed. And to date, we've sent our team of assessors to go and look at over 125,000 different places to collect granular detail about the accessibility. And that is then published on our website and app to really just give people the facts about what you will find, because we know that accessibility is unique to the individual. Everyone's needs are different. So we see our role really being to give people the detail from which they can make an informed choice as to whether somewhere will be accessible for them on that day, because we realise that many people may have a fluctuating condition also. So to give you a bit of information about our approach, we talk about supporting our partners, whether they be an individual, small SME, right up to a big global company, on their accessibility journey. And we know that many people will be just starting out on that, whereas some people may have done quite a lot of work already. And we frame that conversation around the 3 facets of accessibility. So information, how can a disabled person find out about that place or space they want or need to use? How can we help organisations over time improve the inclusivity of that space? So that could be doing really small, low-cost changes right up to doing big refurbishments or new builds. And also, how can we support organisations to give their staff the knowledge and understanding to provide the best possible service to their customers, their visitors, their clients, or to support their colleagues who may have an access requirement or disability. So we do that through three main, I guess, products. Our access guides, which I'm going to focus on today and show you briefly in the time we've got available. But alongside those access guides, we're able to provide advice and guidance on improving physical spaces. And David leads a team within Access-Able that focuses on providing that consultation service, whether it be looking at designs or plans or carrying out full in-depth access audits. And then alongside that, and something we've worked on with 7BR, is a e-learning program to really help upskill colleagues in terms of disability equality, but in an accessible, easy to access, convenient way, because obviously it's all online. And I think a lot of us got used to that during the pandemic. So to focus on the access guide, so if you log on to our website, which I'll talk you through in a second, which is accessable.co.uk, on it you will find what we call our detailed access guides. Really unimaginatively named because they are super detailed, because we know that everyone needs to know something different. So we can collect up to 1,000 pieces of information about one building or one open space, and we certainly did that at 7BR. We collect facts, measurements and photographs. We're not a rating service, we're not TripAdvisor. It's literally to focus on the core details our users have told us are important. So every piece of data we collect has come directly from disabled people saying, for me, that's a really crucial thing to know. How we collect the data of our team of 85 members of staff, 45 of those are experienced surveyors. So anywhere that you see on Access-Able has been visited and assessed by a member of our team, and we also keep that information up to date. And the guys use a unique piece of technology to collect that data to ensure consistency. So while we have 45 surveyors, to an end user, it looks like we've had one really super busy surveyor, because there's a real consistency through that tool. And because what we do is so data driven, we go through a really rigorous quality assurance process before publishing that information and to ensure it's kept up to date. So just to give you a little flavour of what that all looks like, this is our website, accessable.co.uk. Two things that you probably expect from this website: one, that it's easy to search, and two, that it's accessible. So there's lots of different features that users can access, like a read aloud function, a dyslexia friendly font, different colour contrast. And the search works hopefully really intuitively. So you type in what you're looking for, and if we have assessed that place, it will pop up in the search results, and that will take you straight through to the access guide for that given place. So in this case, 7BR. And when the surveyors are on site, they build up the access guide bit by bit. So it's looking at getting in and then getting around a building. We want to give people the full picture. And talking of pictures, as you go through, you've got photographs of particular areas of that building together with the factual information. And it literally talks you through step by step. You can also access a little bit of headline information through our access symbols. And this is also the way that people can filter their results on the website as well. So, for example, starting off on the 7BR guide, I wasn't aware actually till I saw the access guide that there is parking provision, because it's not necessarily obvious straight away. It's really key that we can highlight that within the guide and give people the details of where they can find it. As you may know, 7BR have invested in some sesame steps, so we're obviously keen to talk about those at the entrance, but we also realise that many people may be absolutely fine to walk up the steps that are there, knowing what the height of those are. So we give people the photographs so you can really get a feel for what you're going to expect, lower anxiety of visiting somewhere new. And if you need the depth, you've then got all that detailed information, things like the door width, for example, which is really, really key. As you click through the guide, once you go inside, you've obviously got reception areas. So it's looking at things like the type of flooring. So if you're a wheelchair user, if it's really deep piled carpet, it could cause a barrier to you. We look at things like lighting if you're lip reading, provision of a hearing assistance system. So really trying to give people a full picture of what to expect. And this goes through the guide continually. So if there's a lift, looking at things like audio announcers, looking at the dimensions, particularly if you're using a wheelchair that's very personal to you, that has its own set of dimensions. And then we'd also look at the access that you'd have as a client or visitor coming in. So our focus has really been on areas that you would perhaps be invited to for interview, or as a client coming in or coming to a conference. So to cover all of those areas so that actually you're really clear that that place is going to be accessible, or by having to your specific requirements, or that you've got that information to feel empowered to have that conversation around reasonable adjustment, or just trying to highlight your needs to that particular place that you're visiting. The biggest section of information we collect is all about toilets. Our surveyors spend a lot of their time in toilets because we know how crucial this information is, especially if you're going to be anywhere any length of time, or you've travelled somewhere you know, and spent a couple of hours in the car when you arrive. You know, the toilet's key for you. And this is where we really focus our information. So we talk about where the toilet's located, how far you'll need to walk, but also things like whether there's a mirror, a coat hook and a shelf, really key if you have a stoma, for example, to be able to have those facilities available. Looking at the transfer space onto the toilet if you're a wheelchair user and can only transfer one way, but also things like the lighting levels, the position of alert emergency alarms, the colour contrast on the walls. So often we find toilets where everything has been placed in the right place to the guidance, but actually everything's white. So if you have a visual impairment or a cognitive impairment, it can be really challenging to actually use that facility. So that's a little bit of a fly through the guides, but hopefully it gives you an understanding of where we're trying to get to and what the purpose of the survey is and how people use the information. A couple of things to highlight: that we have a couple of really useful features on the website that you can have an easy read version. So we know people with autism particularly find this really helpful if they want to see the photographs and just get that real feel for where they're going. And you can also search within an access guide, so that if there's a particular thing that you're really keen to see or find, you can look for it very easily from the guide. And our really key focus with all of these guides is enabling people to focus on the reason why they're visiting. So because access isn't isn't a consideration, because that is something that they've closed off before visiting, and so we want people to focus on their reason for their interview or the reason for their visit. As well as the website, all of the information goes on our app, which was mentioned earlier, so you can take it with you. And then, because I'm no short of time today, but just to show you a couple of last things, how the information is integrated is really key. So it's great that it sits on our website, but it's really important that it's integrated and it's where people expect to find it. We work hard at Accessible to make sure our website works well with search engine optimization. So if people Google something, that we come up. But 7BR have done a great job of integrating the information into their contact us page and their where to find us page. So you'll see on the screen this Accessible button, and that takes you directly through to the page on Accessible for 7BR. So it makes it really easy for the person looking for that information. The information can also be downloaded as a PDF or stored on the app, so people have got lots of different options. I mentioned our three-facet approach earlier, so just to give you an idea of how we work with 7BR, as well as producing the user-facing access guide, we also produced a highlights report on how accessibility could be potentially improved. And we tend to do this through sort of a red, amber, green, easy to use matrix. So it gives you that highlights report as to things you can do. And that ranges from really low cost, no cost things up to things that may cost a little bit more money. And we're conscious that every chambers particularly is different. So you may own your building, or it may be historic, or you actually may lease it. So we know that there's lots of different scenarios at play, but what that report should certainly do is give you certainly some quick wins, some things that you can do very easily to improve access, as well as those longer term considerations. And I mentioned the e-learning as well. This is something that we've been really passionate about developing, because I think changing attitudes is so key. And what we've tried to do with that learning is have the legal expertise within it, but really make it engaging, but also share the lived experiences of disabled people. So on the course, we're really focused on disabled people leading that conversation and sharing their experiences of where accessibility has really worked for them, where service has been really good, and things that people could do when things go wrong to really improve the experience going forward. I'm sure everyone on the call, as I'm talking through this, will have questions about cost. So I thought I'd just cover that off on my very last slide, because I think it's worth highlighting that our approach is to work with organisations ongoingly to help improve accessibility and be there as a source of support. And I think what we do very much complements a lot of the stuff that Fleur's been talking through. And we work with BDF at the moment. So how we work with 7BR was to take a holistic approach and effectively deliver the 3 things I briefly talked you through, and do so on a 3-year basis. And our costs are essentially very transparent. Our costs are all based on our time, because of course for us we want to get as many places covered and onto the website for people to find out about as possible. And we work our costs on a time basis. So we look at how long our surveyors will be on site to carry out the initial work and to do the reassessments. And so that typically ranges from £1,000 over a 3-year period, so £1,000 for that whole period, to £3,500, depending upon the size of that particular organisation. And so I hope that was helpful, and of course very much welcome questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Anna. Before I go on to some pre-submitted questions, something probably worth reminding attendees is that Bar Council is a member of the Business Disability Forum. So you can access advice through Bar Council, in particular, if you contact Sam Mercer at Bar Council. A lot of the benefits, not all, but a lot of the benefits from the bar's point of view of BDF membership is available through Bar Council. But if your chambers wants to get the full range of benefits, then of course individual membership is open to chambers too. So thank you to those who submitted some questions in advance of this afternoon, evening. To get the ball rolling, I will ask Mark to lead us with the first question that was posed, which is, how can chambers be more inclusive? Mark.
Okay, so that's a fairly wide-ranging question, but I think a very good starting place is to have a focal point for dealing with disability discrimination. And disabled people face bias, as do people with other protected grounds, but they also face a range of disability-specific barriers, whether that be physical barriers like steps, or the absence of facilities that they need to work or take advantage of services. That's why we have the reasonable adjustments duty in the Equality Act specific to disability, and why tackling disability discrimination in chambers means being involved in all areas of chambers operation and facilities. Is also why I'm really pleased that the pupillage gateway for the coming year will require that chambers has an accessibility officer as a point of contact. We've found at Doughty Street that having a disability committee has brought together a group of committed barristers and staff, which means that we've made a lot of progress over the last 2 years. And we found that disability confidence really helps with that. We started as disability committed, I think just under 2 years ago, and we're now working with Disability Rights UK towards our disability leader accreditation, having this month certified as Disability Confident Employer Level 2. We found that it's real weapon in the armory to sort of leverage change in chambers, as long as you use it to ask how much you can do in order to certify yourself under each criterion, rather than sort of how little you can do to get away with honestly certifying under each criterion. It's a really good learning tool around chambers, and enables you to cut through things that otherwise might get mired in waiting for some overarching EDI review in 2 years' time sort of thing. yeah, so as long as it's used to really try and make progress rather than as a tick box exercise, I think it's perhaps the most valuable thing you could do immediately to make chambers more inclusive, and certainly sign up for the Bar Council pilot scheme with BDF, or take advantage of service from Disability Rights UK or any other provider.
Thanks, Mark. Does anyone else want to chip in respect of that question? I don't know if Fleur, yes. Sorry, Fleur, why don't you go first, and then I'll ask David, move over to David.
So I think one of the important things to be aware of as a chambers is that the vast majority of workplace adjustments that you might put in place, or reasonable adjustments, whether for candidates going through recruitment or employees, are actually not expensive. There sometimes can be an assumption that, goodness, we've got to do something around a disability, it's going to cost us a lot of money, and that's simply not necessarily the case for the vast majority. I think the other thing to be aware of, and a previous discussion, I think I shared a slide on this, is that the Access to Work scheme is also available, and that includes for self-employed barristers too. So it's not only available for employed people. So it's, if the costs are looking like they might be difficult, it might be worth exploring Access to Work. It does have some slightly bureaucratic barriers to get through. It's not necessarily the most friendly of schemes, but it is there and it's available. So I'd say that's one of the main points I would make, is that explore all the avenues for the support that can be made available, and just make sure that you're looking at your user journey as well. So Access Able and the platform they've developed there and the app is amazing, but you should also be looking at the information on your website, everything that goes on your recruitment packs, and just make sure that from a kind of a comms point of view, you're aligned on all of the information that you're sharing with disabled candidates along the way, in terms of, you know, what to expect at each step of recruitment. And this will make sure that if you're doing those things, you're absolutely going to meet the disability confident levels in order to progress through that journey too.
Thanks, Fleur. Sorry, David, did you want to add something?
Actually, Fleur captured most of it. I mean, I would absolutely echo both, and just to say that it's very much a continuum. It's an accessibility journey. It's not something that you can solve overnight, but it is something that you need to make a start on and continually work to improve. So yeah, I'd just echo both of that.
Thank you. Just adding my tuppence worth, I think it's really important also to speak to members of chambers, pupils, members of staff who have a disability, to find out from them what support they need. I have a disability. I know what I need in order to be able to get on with life on a day-to-day basis. And one last point is, it has been the case that Disability Panel, we've had requests for advice on reasonable adjustments where neither the chambers nor the person with the disability is entirely clear what sort of reasonable adjustments might be sensible. And in that situation, ask for external advice. So Bar Council can help, Disability Panel can help, Business Disability Forum can help. There are other organizations out there that can provide advice. And often the fact that it's not clear to you, chambers, person with disability, what can be done doesn't mean that there isn't an answer. Just means that you're not aware of what the answer is. Okay, so actually before we move on to next question, I can see Sam's answered this, but I thought it might be an interesting discussion point. One question was, our biggest problem is that we're in a grade 1 listed building, rented from one of the inns, and it is very difficult to get any changes made. For example, the Sesame Steps 7PR have. Can Bar Council help at all? Well, I suppose I know that certainly I've had discussions with some of the inns. There are, Bar Council doesn't have any real leverage with the inns. What I would say is that all of the inns, I think with the exception of Grays, have their own ED&I committees who are looking at these issues. And I think Grays may be in the process of setting one up. And so there are committees that can be approached to ventilate, to raise these issues with, in the case of Inner Temple, we have an Estates Committee to see what can be done. So I don't think that's something that Bar Council in isolation can do, but we're certainly keen to do what we can to help. And we've had discussions historically, but chambers can approach the inns and make these points and and ask the Estates Committee to look at what can be done. Again, if there are issues, approaching organisations like Business Disability Forum and other organisations that the inns haven't thought of a solution to access issues doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a solution. It just means the solution isn't obvious to the inns. And if the inns want to retain their function of being at the heart of legal London, they are going to have to bite the bullet in terms of balancing the fact that they're Grade 1 listed buildings with the need to be entirely accessible so that the users, the tenants of the inn, can be as representative of the society in which we live. Before I move on to the next question, anyone want to jump in there and dealing with that question, or happy to move on? Fine, brilliant, we shall move on. What do people with disabilities wish chambers knew? And I'll slightly modify that. And what do people with disabilities wish they knew before coming to the bar? Open for the first person that wants to leap in, as it were.
I'm happy to go with a couple of points. So I would say one of the things is that not all disabilities are visible. So I think it's really important to be aware that stats vary on this depending who you speak to, but approximately around about 70% of disabilities might be considered to be non-visible. And so it's really important not to make assumptions about whether somebody does or doesn't need some adjustments. So I think having that quite open mindset about disability, that it's not always going to be the stereotype that you expect. So I'd say that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is I would really like to see the legal profession as a whole, so not just chambers, but the entire profession, embrace much more that social model of disability, where disability is not seen as problematic and something that is vested in that individual, but it's actually something where you explore your responsibility as professionals to look at the barriers that might be being presented to people. So those barriers are barriers which are created for people that make it a bigger struggle to come to the bar. And then final point on this, I think I'm going to use the word intersectionality here, which is people don't just turn up with disability, they might have other characteristics and other experiences that kind of really deepen the experience that they might have of getting to bar school and looking to become a barrister. As somebody who's just gone through that journey myself, I know that coming from a background which is fairly deprived has also been something which is layered over the fact that I too have a disability. So I think you need to have that kind of wider consciousness of the fact that people might be facing more than one barrier, and just making sure that you're providing all the support that you can for people starting their career at the bar.
Constantina, I can see you've got your hand up. Yes.
I just have 2 quick points. As someone, I wish chambers would know that not all of the adjustments that they can make are expensive. I know that when they think of disability, they think about automatically putting sesame steps, for example, or lifts. But in some cases, even there are other options that are cheaper, technically, that they can use to, become more accessible if they have already, wheelchair access. such as disabled desks, or even take steps to supervise the information online. And the other thing is, so I would like to, as someone with disability, I would like to know whether chambers, particular sets, really embrace flexible working, for example, and if they don't, would there be a provision or a chance for them to do if, as a pupil, I need flexible work, for example, or as a tenant? So those are some questions that I think a lot of aspiring barristers are interesting to know from chambers.
Yes, Anna. You're on mute.
You'd think 2 years in, wouldn't you, that would have sorted this out? But no, I thought all of those are really excellent points. I think I just add, and I got some feedback from Gregory, our colleague, who's obviously been through this process, and his feeling was that often there was a reluctancy to sort of publish that information or share that information about the physical environment. But of course, when you're coming into somewhere for the first time, that's going to be your top priority. Can I get in? Can I use the loo? And his sort of feedback on that was, often there's a nervousness about sharing the reality of what access may be like, but actually you're much better to get that factual information out there than to not put that information out there, because you can manage those expectations. You can have those conversations in advance to make some of those adjustments, as Constantina said, rather than be in a situation on the day where a very limited amount of things can be done when someone finds an access barrier. So that was all I wanted to add, really.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And Mark.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things. Firstly, on the social model of disability, when I returned to the bar with a number of disabilities, I found that there was a huge lack of understanding that the failure to make reasonable adjustments was itself disability discrimination, and it was necessary to fight to make both chambers and courts look at themselves from top to bottom and the range of barriers they put in the way of disabled people, whether that's physical barriers stopping them getting access or not providing the things that they need in order to practice, some of which, as has just been pointed out, are not very expensive at all. The other thing, and this harks back to the last question as well, is on this anticipatory duty. The anticipatory duty strictly in law applies to our clients, and it's an important duty which disability confident accreditation helps with, because too often it's left to the individual barrister and their clerk under a reasonable adjustments policy to sort of magic up the reasonable adjustments that a client might need in an individual case. But as the panel's reasonable adjustments guidance has pointed out, there is in practice an anticipatory duty on chambers to think about how they are going to give a fair pupillage to a disabled pupil, because, as has been pointed out in relation to the difficulties with buildings, if you wait until say a wheelchair using pupil has won pupillage in your latest pupillage round, and then start thinking about, oh, how are they going to be able to get in the door? How are we going to make reasonable adjustments? That will be too late. It's also, as Constantina's pointed out, ignoring the barriers that are being placed to mini pupils getting experience of chambers. So chambers need to be thinking now not only about how they can better serve clients, but also anticipating how they would accommodate a range of disabled pupils and mini pupils.
Yeah. Yes. Good point, Mark. Sorry, you still got your hand up, Mark. Did you want to say something else? Ah, fine. Thank you. So another. Let me just check. There isn't open question. Yes. Anna, this is probably for you. David, don't bother typing the answer. I will. We'll let Anna answer it live. Accessible, can quick changes be made to detailed access guides when changes are made based on your recommendations without having to completely redo the process?
So the short answer is yes. It's like a short answer. So we can update the guides overnight. If you've made a big structural change, like there's a new entrance or you've got new accessible toilets, our surveyors go back out and reassess those. But that's relatively easily organised and is pretty quick because we've got so many surveyors around the country, particularly London-based surveyors.
Brilliant, thank you. One of the questions that was posed, which Sam has answered, but I think possibly Mark, Constantina and I might want to add our tuppence worth to, was I'm soon to be on my feet, so very junior, but I've had a physical disability since birth and have experienced my own struggles getting to the bar. How can I or anyone in a similar position help as an individual to support further inclusiveness at the bar? I wondered, Constantina, if you wouldn't mind having the first stab at answering that.
That's a very good question. I think what has helped me as someone now trying to exit the profession is speaking with members of the profession that identify as disabled, who are vocal about sharing their experience. In that way, first of all, I found that I'm not the only person trying that aspires to, access this very competitive and traditional profession, but there are others that have done it and have been very successful. And it's also a hub of information. I'm able to ask questions and get advice and also learn about things that I didn't even know that exist, type of support. Before meeting, for example, Dr. Berg, I didn't know about Access Able or with various, meeting various barristers or even, pupils or other, more junior barristers. So I think it's about being vocal and putting it out there that you're happy to receive messages from aspiring barristers with disabilities to, with questions they have, and support organizations that aim to improve equality and diversity within the profession. And there are a lot of amazing organizations that come, and developed as time, progresses. So yeah, I think that's my answer to this question.
Thank you, Constantina. Mark, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think being as vocal as you can be is hugely valuable. I returned to the bar disabled after a couple of decades in practice as a non-disabled barrister, and I think the perception of sort of self-employed practitioners acts as a perceived barrier to recognizing our legal duties towards each other in terms of reasonable adjustments. The bar is far more sensitive, in my experience, to its obligation towards pupils and students, as indeed, in my experience, is probably the court service. So there is, and has been in the last couple of years, nothing more effective than the number of pupils coming to the bar who are prepared to be open, assertive and critical, and to take part in the sort of grassroots organizations that are now flourishing. I remember a sort of Twitter discussion a year or so ago where someone said that they had been advised by someone not to attempt to come to the bar as a pupil as a wheelchair user, to which several very senior members of the bar expressed their shock and outrage that such advice might ever have been given. To which I thought, absolutely, yes, I agree. But also, I hope to hear your outrage expressed equally loudly about the real barriers that still exist that Constantina was describing, and that I also experience in finding somewhere to place myself in court in order to make submissions in an equivalent position from my opponent.
Thanks, Mark. I would add, I think that there are some very good, as has been pointed out, some very good grassroots organisations such as Bringing Disability to the Bar. But I also think that the more traditional organisations such as the Inns, there is a real benefit in interacting with the Inns. So my own Inn, the Inner Temple, is fantastic. We have our own ED&I committee. But I think there is a risk with a lot of these things where you have ED&I committees, they're having to deal with issues of race, sexual orientation, sex, as well as disability. And sometimes disability can get lost in the mix. And I think that approaching your Inn and suggesting that they set up a disability network for the Inn, to which members of the Inn can have input, contacting your specialist bar association and asking what they are doing. Again, many of the bigger SBAs have equality, diversity and inclusivity committees. What are you doing? So, for example, ComBar, a very large amount of the litigation that ComBar will do will be in the High Court. Bar Council is making, through the disability panel, a lot of noise about the appalling condition of the court estate, even the fabulous Rolls building. As one of our colleagues pointed out, if you're in a court on the second floor with all the disabled loos on the ground floor, your choice at lunchtime is, do I go to the loo or do I eat? While Bar Council is making noise, it would be more grease to our elbow if more of the bar were making noise about it and getting in touch with your SBA and asking them to join us. Chambers will often now, some of the bigger sets, all sets will have an EDO, but some of the bigger sets will also have an Equality and Diversity Committee. Again, getting involved with that, asking chambers to think about what can be done, getting involved with external networks, getting more involved with the disability panel. I'm conscious that, especially if you're just starting out, there's going to be an understandable desire to some extent focus on getting your practice, your career up and running. But if you want to contribute, there are a number of ways of doing it. And we would be particularly delighted if anyone's interested in joining us at Bar Council, taking matters forward. Do get in touch with us. There are 101 ways you can help us with our work. So, right. Yes. What kind of accessibility support would people with disabilities like to see implemented at Chambers? Can I ask you, Fleur, to have a first stab at this, if that's all right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a very wide question. And I think the point has been made earlier that not all disabled people have got the same disability or the same needs. And so it does very much need to be person-centered. So I would say having a process, having, as Mark pointed out, either a committee or an individual that takes responsibility for that process for workplace adjustments, I think that's really important. I would say what you can do, which are perhaps some things which are a little easier to make sure that you're embedding into your process are things like ensuring that when you are offering interviews that you make it clear that you're prepared to make adjustments, and giving some examples of what those might be, so people don't have to second guess that and feel fearful that they won't be included in whatever that category might be. So it could be things, routine adjustments I've seen are for neurodiverse candidates, for example, sharing the interview questions about half an hour before the interview so that they can compose themselves and get a sense of, you know, what to expect with the interview and actually put their best possible self across when they're doing interviews. I would say absolutely, if you're looking at the physical adjustments, the Access Able app is a really good start. If you don't yet have that, just making sure you've got that information up on your website about the physical adjustments that are there, where the nearest parking spot for, like, say, blue badge parking, what facilities do you have on site that can support somebody. But I would say broadly, it does need to be person-centered to the individual. So what you've got to do is set out the approach, which is you are open to the conversation, you're supportive, you really welcome the conversation, and then giving a sense of what it is that you're prepared to do to support people. I'm sure there are others that will want to add into this one as well.
Thanks, Fleur. Constantina, do you have any thoughts?
I think everyone has pretty much covered what I was going to say. So I don't want to take up the time from other questions that will probably come up.
Brilliant, thank you. How about yourself? Oh, David, sorry, I can see your hands up.
Thanks, Faisal. I mean, I think I'd echo everything that Fleur just talked about. I'd also say, you know, it's about being open and transparent, isn't it? You know, we just heard about a grade 1 listed building that, you know, actually everybody understands that there are going to be certain challenges about accessing that particular environment. But the first thing is about being open and transparent about what it actually is, and so people can understand it for themselves, prepare themselves, understand what support they might need in order to access that environment, or what challenges they might have in order to make certain changes in respect of where they might meet in that particular place. And then the second aspect is also about recognizing, you know, this is a journey, you know, so this is about making sure that all staff are confident and skilled about engaging with disabled people on an everyday basis, and that, you know, changes can be, you know, impactful changes can be as small as coat hooks in toilets. It can be about changing lighting levels to enable somebody who relies on lip reading to be able to understand what's being said. So, you know, it's about looking at the breadth of the situation, I think, and setting out a starting point of being open and transparent about what you have.
Sorry, I just did it there myself, talking when I was muted. Thank you, David. I suppose for my part, I think one of the issues that I have in terms of accessibility support that I've noticed is, I think a lot of chambers I've spoken to, there's a tendency for accessibility to be a discussion amongst the barristers, but not always discussed amongst staff, clerks team, etc. So in a sense, if I can get to my desk and the building's all very lovely, but the clerks work on the basis, well, that Mr. Sneak, he can't actually, he's got mobility issues, so probably shouldn't be putting him forward for that brief at Southend County Court. Everything else is pointless. If I can't earn my crust, if I can't actually go and do the job, everything else is pointless. And it strikes me that what I would want chambers to be doing is not having accessibility support hived off into a little silo where the well-meaning members of the Quality and Diversity Committee are looking at making the building more accessible or better physical infrastructure, but also mainstreaming accessibility. So clerks understand that practitioners with disabilities aren't this rare little blip that has to be catered for in a little silo, but it's a core part of their business to make sure that every member of chambers, including those with disabilities, are properly catered for. So that means that if you have a practitioner with a physical disability, that means that they may need a little more support from court staff on arrival, or that the court building has to be accessible. Chambers practice teams are proactive in dealing with that. If, for example, you know that a member of chambers has a disability that means that they need a little bit of extra time to read through papers. When no point, and I don't know if many people get this, but the number of times my brief comes with 5 emails with embedded in those 5 emails another 5 emails, each of which has a document attached, which may mean I've got to spend half an hour, 45 minutes grabbing documents. If you've got someone who's dyslexic, for example, who may need a little extra time reading the papers, or you've got someone with ADHD, having to deal with those nested emails, instructions that are somewhat opaque in terms of how papers get to you, can really be a very significant issue. And again, if chambers are aware that these are things that members of chambers with disabilities may struggle with, and so clerks are proactive, it can be quite debilitating if you are constantly having to ask for help. If it's mainstreamed, you shouldn't actually have to get to the point of asking for help. It just becomes second nature that the assistance that you need to have the full practice that you're entitled to, that you get that assistance. Oh, I see we have another question. Is any work being done specifically on mental disability, e.g. PTSD, making it desirable for certain subjects to be left out of interview questions? Does anyone want to take that first? I can have a stab at it if no one else is dying to do so. It looks like nobody else is dying to do so, so I will. Certainly, I think it is fair to say that for a very long time, mental disability was very much a poor relation. I think organisations such as Neurodisability at the Bar have brought it front and centre. Disability Panel is working on making sure that issues affecting those who are neurodiverse, those with mental health issues, are taken into account. As part of Bar Council's fair recruitment training, and I think it's also in the fair recruitment guidance, there is reference to thinking about the appropriateness of questions. Certainly one of the issues. It was certainly one of the issues that I was asked to think about when I did training, and I would, and I know the INS are now approaching it in terms of the questions that they provide for scholarship interviews. So INA, for example, we realised that, for example, for a long time we would give students the option, applicants for scholarships, the option of looking at one of 3 cases and doing an analysis of that case, a criminal case, civil case, and I think it was a public law case, and then the dawning horror that sometimes criminal cases might involve serious allegations of sexual abuse, and it might trigger certain individuals who've had certain unfortunate experiences. And so again, an emphasis ad INA, we're not going to ask those sorts of questions. I think more can be done, but I think we're on the path to dealing with things. Before I hand over, I think, apologies, it should be neurodiversity at the bar. If I said neurodisability, I'm sure I have. Apologies for that. Sorry. So does anyone else want to jump in on that question?
Fine. So I was also just going to say, some of it's also about practical information. You know, we were long talking about actually the understanding of neurodiversity for some time, and you know, actually we're only just catching up. You know, particularly in the last 5 years, people's understandings of neurodiversity and some of the challenges experienced, perceptions, expectations, etc., has changed fundamentally. And actually, there's an update to national best practice, BSA 300, in terms of the PAS coming out. Should have been earlier this year, but hopefully towards the end of this year, which will reflect some of those specifics in terms of providing organisations with very specific guidance on specific changes around accessibility to accommodate neurodiverse people. But you know, it can be as simple as things like patterned flooring, for instance, you know, shiny or gloss flooring. That, you know, there's a lot that's misunderstood, that can be really simple to change, to adapt, to accommodate, and that it is just about sharing that type of information to make facilities managers, etc., more understanding of some of the challenges and complications about some everyday activities which can reflect poorly on that organisation.
Sorry, sir, I can see your hands up.
Thank you. So I was just going to say, at Business Disability Forum, we have both a mental health toolkit and a neurodiversity toolkit. And the purpose of those is very much to support both the organisation, but also crucially line managers, so that they can have those conversations in a supportive way and know, you know, what they can put around individuals to provide support, whether it's at the point of going through recruitment or as an actual employee or somebody that you're working with as a colleague. What I would say is, there is perhaps a further category of accessibility to consider here, which I think is digital accessibility, which I think we've perhaps not really touched on in quite the same way. So absolutely physical accessibility, you know, steps, toilets, lifts, those things very, very much matter, but and you know, lighting and so on. But I think digital accessibility is only going to be a growing area for the law profession in general. So we saw during the pandemic with COVID, cases moving to having online hearings where they might not have perhaps had that previously. A lot of teaching in law schools moved online. And I think it's perhaps an area that's been a little bit neglected in terms of making sure that all of the digital platforms which are being used within the legal profession are truly accessible to people with a range of different communication needs. And I think that also goes back to the point around how you support neurodivergent candidates, because sometimes that overload in terms of information, systems where you've got too many ways of interacting, you know, WhatsApp's going off, you know, messages, email, all the different range of communication modes that there might be. So I would just say, I think digital accessibility is definitely an area that requires more attention.
Thank you, Fleur. Does anyone else want to add anything on this topic? Okay, so one point I will just deal with in terms of accessibility support more generally, because I've had a very helpful message from Sam pointing out that I have forgotten to deal with this when we were answering some of the questions. One of the things that the disability panel is very keen to see chambers implementing is having a nominated accessibility officer or access officer. In discussions with HMCTS, Mark and I, and Judicial Office, Mark and I have made the point that to HMCTS that it is insane that in this day and age, each individual court or tribunal does not have an access officer. So if you need a reasonable adjustment, if you need help getting access, there is a designated help point that you can get in touch with. The idea that many chambers do not have front and center a designated person you can get in touch with for the same purpose is a problem. A problem both in terms of if a query goes to someone who is inexperienced at handling it, it's very easy to I don't know the answer, well, computer says no. Whereas if you've got an accessibility officer, hopefully over time they will develop the expertise that means that they can deal with these queries in the way that we would want. but also it's just common sense, just in terms of, I mean, if you think about it in terms of clients, it's not just barristers, pupils, staff that we have obligations toward. There are issues in terms of client accessibility too. And whereas I will know who my chamber's EDO is, clients need to be able to get in touch with someone and ask them to deal with access issues. And so one thing we would heartily be asking chambers to think about is to nominate an accessibility officer who can deal with requests for assistance with access, not just from members of chambers, but outward looking from clients too. We would also suggest that chambers thinks about carrying out an audit. A few years ago, Disability Panel came up with an accessibility audit toolkit. We don't pretend it's the last word in assessing the accessibility of your building, but doing an audit where you're going from street level through your building with our toolkit, identifying where your building may fall short, where your infrastructure may fall short, is incredibly useful. And again, banging the drum for disability confident, partly a combination of Mark and Fleur having persuaded me of just how amazeballs this is. You would really heartily recommend you all think about becoming disability confident champions in your chambers, getting on to sign up. I hope Mark doesn't mind my putting it this way, but if a chamber such as Doughty Street, who have a phenomenal reputation for their commitment to human rights, Equality Act, if Mark found that when he returned to practice after a short time away, discovered that chambers weren't entirely geared up to dealing with disability, then if there are issues there, I hate to think what the rest of the bar might be like. And actually doing something like disability confident and doing an accessibility audit means that you're thinking about these issues before you actually have to face them head on with a request for assistance, a reasonable adjustment from a client, a colleague, a member of staff. So sorry for that. Hopefully Sam will forgive me for having forgotten to address this earlier. Before I move on to final question, is there anything that any of you guys on the panel would like to add to what I've said? Mark, yes.
Yeah, I agree completely. On the one hand, having an accessibility officer or focal point is absolutely vital. It's too big a range of issues to be, in my experience, dealt with by a EDO who has to deal with all other protected grounds as well. At the same time, mainstreaming it through the organization is also important. As Faisal very rightly said, and this harks back to some of my experiences, sometimes chambers or courts will be very bothered about whether you can get in the door easily or how easily, but think that that is the extent of the battle. And they will forget about the fact that disabled barristers are also barristers who are competing for work and who need to be thought of in that way and need to take account of the fact that they may have unreasonable demands from solicitors they need to deal with before court. So it may not be an answer for the clerks to say, well, what we need to do is get you down there an hour before the court starts and then we'll iron out any problems. I've talked a couple of times about the range of physical barriers disabled people face, but it's also important to remember that we also face bias, as do other protected grounds, and stigma, whether that relates to unseen or seen disabilities. The same stigma about in terms of disability discrimination that exists in society. So one of the most beneficial things that I've found in the disability confidence scheme is that enables us to leverage a budget and resources and the sort of moral, at least, obligation to attend disability equality training, which is really vital, I think, for ensuring that the whole Chamber's workforce, clerks, staff, barristers, pupil supervisors, team leaders, understand these issues, both in terms of reasonable adjustments and in terms of disability discrimination more widely and stigma. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm conscious that we are have a 7 o'clock finish, so unless there's anyone who has a burning final question, I'm going to wrap up now. I will just remains to me to thank our panelists, particularly those who gave a presentation. It was very interesting from all of you. I'm very grateful to Constantina. I found your experiences and your the challenges you've overcome fascinating to hear about. If you have, if anyone who's attending has any questions, they want advice, please do get in touch with us at Bar Council. The whole purpose of the disability panel is to help members of the bar, help the profession deal with the sorts of unexpected issues that one may have in dealing with disability. Easiest way to get in touch is to send an email to equality@barcouncil.org.uk. That's equality@barcouncil.org.uk. And can I please also encourage you to complete the feedback forms that could be sent, and if you can let us know what other events we could offer that be useful to you, that would be gratefully received too. Thank you to everyone who attended this evening, and thank you again to the panelists. Good evening.